You were right about Pisistratus. He's Weasley. He's a tyrant now. He took our arms. And Solon responds with, you put your weapons into his hands. Now as his slaves, you must do as he commands.
You are listening to And If Love Remains, a unique show spotlighting people, ideas, science, culture, and art. Your host,
Mike Lovett.
You are listening to that great podcast in the sky, And If Love Remains. I am your host, Mike Lovett, and I have with me the Lion of Liberty, the preacher of freedom, the man, the machine, the legend, Brother Joey Wolverton. Welcome.
Thank you, Michael. I am grateful for those titles. I'd like to be worthy of those titles. I remember something that Lord Byron called Patrick Henry the forest-born Demosthenes.
Ooh.
And I always thought, man, I would love to be known. First of all, to be called anything by Lord Byron, would be an honor. To even have your name known to someone like Lord Byron and to have him call you the forest-born Demosthenes. So yeah, I need to live worthy of any sort of title. At least I didn't give myself the title. You know what I mean?
It's true. No, these are titles, and they are. I find them worthy because the things that you teach, the things have affected me greatly. And and if it's just for me, hey, you're my Lion of Liberty. So
thank you, man. I appreciate that so much.
Well, I'm really pumped. Because we're going to be talking some Cato's letters, and this is kind of a take two on our, those of you may have noticed that we've got Cato's letter 69. The audio wasn't great on that one. And so we're going to do it again. I'm going to keep that up because I'm sure we're going to cover, while we will cover a lot of the same information, I'm sure some new things will come up because they always do, because this stuff is so deep. Like there's no bottom to this stuff. So I'm excited to go over it. We're going to talk about Cato 69. And I think it's important just to kind of give us a place in history. I think it's one of the things that you and I have talked about is the importance of getting this information out and making it palatable, making it understandable, maybe helping people to be inspired like we've been inspired by this great work. So talk a little bit about your relationship to Cato's letters and, what it's all about.
Yeah. So my relationship to Cato's letters is, in college. I'll just give you the really short version. I think I've told this story on your podcast so many times, but in college, I was the first person on either side of my family to go to college. And I really was a short dog in tall grass. I didn't understand what was going on. I remember showing up to class the first day and having homework due. And I was like, how did y'all know about any home? We haven't even had class. Well, little did I know that, on the board in the building, there was homework for the first day of class. I didn't know that at all.
Right.
And no one had told me about that. And so anyway, I had a professor there that I'd gone to him and asked, and basically told him I was going to drop out. And he told me, you're a bright kid. You're just ignorant. And he's like, you can overcome your ignorance. And he gave me the assignment of taking the Federalist and eventually the Anti-Federalist and looking just the mass market paperback versions and just looking in the indices of those two books and writing down any names that I didn't recognize. Mm-hmm. And of course, pretty much all of them. Anyway, long story short, one of the books that were repeatedly mentioned by our founding fathers was Cato's letters by John Trenchard and Thomas Gordon. And so I think my first foray into all of this was Algernon Sidney. And I noticed, so I read Discourses Concerning Government by Algernon Sidney, which, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, when they founded the University of Virginia, Algernon Sidney's Discourses on Government was named as one of the 4 books incoming freshmen should have read prior to matriculating at UVA. And Jefferson had said in a letter that if we are to maintain our system of government, that it was necessary that discourse concerning government be put into the hand of every American youth as soon as he's able to understand what's being written.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, imagine today if instead of reading, Dick and Jane or Harry Potter or whatever else, a hungry caterpillar or whatever people read, imagine if they were, I'm serious.
Yeah.
Because you rise to the level of the competition. And if you are given a book, I remember being in fourth grade and thinking, this is ridiculous.
Right.
Like that I'm reading this is an embarrassment. And so imagine if we really handed discourses. Well, going back to Cato's letters. So I remember when I was in Cato's letters by Trenchard and Gordon, I remember one of them, and it was a pretty early, it was pretty early on in the series. So what they did is they wrote letters to the editor in London one letter a week,
right,
published in a London newspaper. Basically, at the beginning, calling out the destruction of British power that was affected by the surrender by Parliament to a private company of the British monetary policy.
Right.
It's called the South Sea Company. And if you are to read it, you will see that the South Sea Company is the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
And the government of Britain had given to some of their very powerful friends in the South Sea Company power over the currency, power over just their monetary policy, period. And that's how they start out. They start out saying, these guys are not elected. These guys are, they are not accountable to the people of England, and they're ruining England. Well, they go on, and in their letters, they call out tyranny in all its forms. And I noticed that early on in the letters, they had one where they quoted something from discourses, whole cloth. They just say, this is this, quoted directly from Algernon Sidney, who was one of their heroes. And so anyway, Cato's letters, and then I come to find out that the founding so these letters were written about the time that our founding fathers' parents were being born. And so scholars have come to call Cato's letters the dress rehearsal for revolution. In other words, they didn't come right at the revolution. They came a generation before our revolutionary fathers.
They were the John the Baptist of.
Right. They were exactly. Yeah, right. They were the John the Baptist. And so a really good story. I wrote a biography of James Madison. And one of the stories that I read that doesn't really get repeated. I mean, I think the last time it was mentioned in a biography of Madison was one that was written in the 1880s. But Madison, his family, the Madison family, they had a lot of land, but they didn't have cash. They couldn't have just given you cash on hand. They were always, riding that precipice, between prosperity and poverty.
Right.
But they had a lot of land. And so anyway, James Madison, the president's father, who was also James Madison, he did a lot of business with England. And so he had come to know about Trenchard and Gordon. And although he couldn't afford, so they eventually in England bound all these letters together. And that was in Gordon's lifetime. They bound them together. But James Madison Sr. could not afford to buy the bound copy of
Books
Cato's.
were really expensive then.
Right. It was very expensive. There was no Amazon. You couldn't just
no Kindle version.
You couldn't get it. Yeah, Madison on his Kindle. So what he would do is he would buy maybe one or two of them, and then he would bring them home, and Nellie Madison, Madison's mom, would sew them together, like literally sew them together in sort of a homemade book, so that little Jimmy, as they called him, so that he could have them to read. So that by the time he became, he was 11 years old and had his first tutor, because of course, like every one of our founding fathers, literally, not exaggerating, every one of them was homeschooled. Every one of them taught at home their whole lives. Now, some of them, like James Madison, when he was 11, his dad got together with dads in that area. I hate to say neighborhood because the closest house was like 2 miles.
Right.
But in that neighborhood, and they hired a teacher, Donald Robertson, and he was 11. And James Madison, in his autobiography, which is astonishingly about 16 pages long, which is remarkable when you realize that Kim Kardashian's memoirs are like 2 volumes. And James Madison's autobiography is like 16 pages.
Yeah.
And in there, he writes that almost everything he achieved in life, he owed to Donald Robertson.
Wow.
And Donald Robertson, that's a story. I'm writing a biography of Donald Robertson because the story is insane. The story, but we won't get into that. Back to Cato's letter. So, the Madisons were insistent that James, when he show up at the building that the dads had built for Mr. Robertson to hold his school there in Virginia, in Orange County, that he know who Trenchard and Gordon.
Yeah.
He'd be familiar with certain things. And so there was his mom sewing together little individual one-offs of Cato's letters because, Mike, I mean, something else, you've got to realize we're talking, these were written in the early 1720s.
Yeah.
20 years before Madison was born, 22 years before he was born. And they were reprinted in every colonial newspaper from Savannah to Boston.
Wow.
Every one of them, they were reprinted. And it was the most reprinted letter in colonial times. And so you see that our founding fathers, their letters, their speeches drip with references from Trenchard and Gordon. And so often that many times they don't even credit them.
Yeah, it's assumed that you know.
Right? Yeah, but if you read their letters, they'll say something like, how the esteemed Mr. Trenchard would say, or they would say, as Cato said, and not meaning Cato the Roman statesman. Right. They mean Cato, John Trenchard, and Thomas Gordon. And so I came to read them because of my desire to read everything that the founding fathers read, the idea being I have a shot of valuing liberty, putting the same value on liberty as the founding fathers did, if I learned about liberty from the same sources they did.
Yeah.
And so that was my goal. And I remember talking to one of my friends and saying, I want to put together a library of all the things they read just by going through their references, by going through their letters, their speeches, their sermons, all of this, their commonplace books, and saying, if they read it, I want to read it. Because obviously, Mike, their reading of these things, as Shakespeare would say, screwed their courage to the sticking point.
Yeah.
It made it where they appreciated the divine provenance of liberty. And they appreciated that sometimes liberty, that celestial object, as Thomas Paine called it, has a cost that is high.
Right.
The cost of blood, you see. And so now my mission in life literally is to do all that I can to familiarize kids. Mainly I aim at, high school, college age kids, but adults as well, with the books that our founding fathers read and quoted. And like I say, one of the most often, they're in the top 10, they're in the top 5 most often quoted authors by the founding fathers, John Trenchard, Thomas Gordon, who wrote together under the name Cato, England, 1720s. And everyone, Mike, I even have a series. I used to do a TikTok account where I would every, I think it was Friday, because that's the way the dates lined up. So they continued publishing their letters in 1723. And since we're in 2023, it's exactly 300 years. So I would do this thing to sort of challenge myself. And then I decided to start recording it for TikTok. What did Trenchard and Gordon write 300 years ago today that is completely applicable to our own time. And never once did it fail.
Yeah.
You know, I did that for months where it was like, boom, this is what they're writing about. And look how it's applicable to our own time. And so when you get, there's sort of this, you just go down the table of contents and the very titles that they gave to these letters. Remember, they're just letters to the editor of these papers, of this paper. And when you go down the titles, you need no more than read the titles and you want to jump in.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. And there's so many like things I want to kind of talk about for a second. And that's one of them is the importance of telling the truth about the cost of liberty. And you mentioned that and how important that is, not just why that's important today. It's important to tell the truth because it's important for people to recognize the pattern that's happening and how we can, and when they see it today, they go, okay, we're living in this time. We're living in the days preceding the revolution. We're living in the days of, and history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it does rhyme, as someone famous said, I'm sure. And I think having this stuff, making it well known what Trenchard and Gordon said can be a prelude to our revolution, to our time of saying, you know, can we prick the hearts of those mothers in the future who will be, you know, sowing the books and making sure that their children are reading the things from, you know, from the bottle, from the breast, that they'll be able to share these ideas and raise up you know, you say it better than me, but raise up a group of people that are willing to pay that price that's necessary to tear down the tyrant. Yeah.
I mean, that's the hope. And that's you know, I used to tell my kids when I taught in a brick and mortar school, I would tell them that history doesn't repeat itself. History is inert. History is just words on a page. What happens is the reason we say history repeats itself is because humans who have agency, who have free will, we continue making the same stupid mistakes. Mm-hmm. That's why it seems like history repeats itself. You know, it's like the French philosopher Charles Pinot Duclos.
But here's the thing. And I'm sorry to interrupt, but the thing that you say we keep making the same stupid mistakes, but think about it. Even the South Sea Company, it sure was a mistake for the people that were making bank on those friends. It was a mistake for the people to allow it to happen, but it was not a mistake for them. So in other words, like, people are always going to use their power and authority to prop themselves up, make themselves rich, and give themselves power over the people.
Yeah. And Trenchard and Gordon actually have several letters devoted to the fact that when it comes down to it, people more often than not choose power over principle. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there's several of their letters, a series of them devoted in these Cato's letters devoted to that. And so, yes, we could, you know, look at, you know, as Patrick Henry, I have one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that is the lamp of history. I know no way of judging the future but by the past, right? So if we look and we say, look at this, 300 years ago, these guys whose names you didn't know until I just mentioned them to you said something based on their study of history, was happening in their own day. Now we have this geometric opportunity to take their study of history, and their study of history is now a part of our study of history, and apply it to our own day. So we're sort of doubling down on the ability of history to illuminate the path forward. And we can do that. And think about it. You talk about Nellie Madison sewing together these Cato's letters. Mike, I'm like holding an iPad right now where you can get every one of them for free and they're in English for free 24 hours a day on a piece of glass in your pocket.
Yeah.
Right? There is no excuse. There might have been an excuse for James Madison not to have read Cato's.
But his mother didn't allow it.
Right. His parents didn't allow it. And it's like I always say, Madison and those founding fathers, they were built before the excuse factories were founded. They did not James Madison didn't let his poor health, his slight stature, he didn't let any of that get in his way, right? He overcame. He's like, if I'm not going to be physically intimidating, I'm going to be intellectually intimidating. Jefferson is like, if I can't be the greatest orator, I'm going to be the greatest writer, right? Do not point to your shortcomings and use them as an excuse. Use them as a stepping stone, right? It's like Marcus Aurelius, the obstacle is the way.
Right.
If you're physically unimposing, that is the way. That obstacle tells you what? You're going to have to be imposing some other way, right? Be imposing intellectually, right? And so there are all of these things. And so you can just imagine if James Madison could have had access to Cato's letters on a piece of glass. So what excuse do we have? We have no excuse. And Mike, just imagine the number of people, if you count, now this is a thing I've done to just make a point to people, because everybody always, we can't get this done. It's too far gone. Rubbish. We can get it done, right? We can definitely get this done. We can restore liberty to this people. And if you look and you count all the people who served in the First Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress, the Confederation Congress, and the Constitutional Convention, and the ratifying conventions in all the 13 of the states, if you add up all those men as a percentage of the population of the 13 states in 1789, that would be the number of people in America, and the number of people we would need to be an equal ratio would fit inside a baseball stadium today. Right?
Right.
If we can fill Chase Field with young men, young women who from the cradle, that these words become mother's milk to them. And that's all we need. If we can do that, we can do what our fathers did. Because we will come to appreciate that it is better to die resisting than live submitting.
That's right. Amen.
And you learn that from Cato's letters.
And so we're going to talk about Cato number 69 and why this one. Why would it make sense for somebody to start with number 69? Just generally, like, I mean, we could have started anywhere, and this is the one that you gave me to read.
Yeah, well, I it's one of those things, like when I first started reading it, I read them all because you know how it is. When you discover something that just ignites your soul, you read it all. You read it all and you just devour it. So when I was like, oh my gosh. So I just started. But then when I became a teacher of these things, I realized that some of the students, they didn't immediately sense that same ardent desire to consume Cato.
Yeah.
So I thought, how can I spark that desire? And so what I decided to do is, with regard to Cato's letters, I would have the actual physical books in my classroom. And I'll tell you, just pause for a second. I would talk about these books so much. And most every book that I teach about is published. If it's still published at all, it's published by Liberty Fund. Now, Liberty Fund out of Indianapolis. Well, I think they've moved now, but it's Indiana. I went and saw it would fit in this room originally. But Liberty Fund, they were receiving so many orders from Arizona all of a sudden. And they wrote me because I had ordered books myself. I was ordering books, extra copies to have in my classroom.
Right.
Paying for them myself, and they wrote me and said, "Do you know anything about this?" And I said, "Oh, well, my students, long story short, Liberty Fund sent me, I came home one day from school and my entire front door of my house was blocked from view by boxes of books sent to me as a thank you by Liberty Fund."
Oh, wow.
So I didn't open them. I put them in the car and we took them up to school. And that morning I had all the kids come up and we unboxed them together.
Oh, how fun.
Yeah, it was one of those things you'll never forget.
What a cool thing.
Yeah. And so when you open Cato's letters, something that you notice is they all have titles. Each letter, Trenchard and Gordon themselves gave each letter a title. And so I would tell the kids, it came to me, have them read whatever, just go through the table of contents and read whichever one sparks their fancy, right? Whichever one of these strikes your fancy, read that one.
Yeah.
Well, I noticed that a lot of kids started gravitating to 69. And I'm like, okay, what's the title? So the title, I don't know if do you have it there?
I'm pulling it up right now.
So the title is Address to the Freeholders, etc., about the choice of their representatives, which doesn't sound sexy.
No, it doesn't.
That doesn't sound, but I guess, you read through it and boy, from the first sentence, this hits you between the eyes and you sit up and you pay attention to what these long deceased heroes of liberty have to say to you, speaking to you as a voice crying from the dust. What's interesting, Mike, is these two men, tracking down any information about them is nearly impossible. And if you read the introduction written by Gordon, after Mr. Trenchard passed away, Gordon, who was 34 years younger than Trenchard, Gordon's like, I'm not going to give a bunch of information on Mr. Trenchard. He didn't want to be famous. He wanted the message, not the messenger, to be the focus. So
it seems to be a tribute to his time and place. The idea of fame is I wouldn't say it's a modern idea, but the idea of just trying to get famous, the really great people abhorred that idea.
Right. It wasn't fame for fame's sake.
Yeah.
If you were famous because of some great thing you'd done, that was okay. If the universe bestowed fame upon you, but it was not virtuous to seek after fame. So anyway, from the first sentence of Cato number 69, which was published March 10th, 1722. So 301 years ago, yeah. And a little change. The title's not sexy. So I wondered, what are these kids seeing? And if you read, just the first sentence, you pretty much get why these kids were so fascinated.
Yeah. So it says, to the freeholders, citizens, and burghers of the county, cities, and towns of Great Britain, gentlemen, there is no natural or political body, but is subject to the variations and injuries of time. Both are composed of springs, wheels, and ligaments, all in perpetual motion and all liable to wear out and decay. And as the parts are mortal, the whole must be mortal too. But as natural bodies may continue their existence and preserve their duration by action, by the addition of new particles, or by removing from time to time all occasional obstructions which clog their motion and check their vigor, as long as their stamina, first principles, or original constitution are capable of subsisting, so a political machine may do the same. And some writers in politics have asserted that the same might be immortal, which is not my opinion.
Okay. So all you have to look at this, if you don't see, after reading this, if you don't see the fingerprint of Cato's letters in the Declaration of Independence, then you're not paying attention.
Yeah.
Because this is exactly what Jefferson was writing about in the Declaration of Independence. So basically, this one was written by John Trenchard. And he says that, in the body politic, in a government, in a society, it's made up of various objects. It's made up of springs, wheels, ligaments, and all those things are liable to decay. And that when you see that decay happening, you do something to replace those parts.
Right.
Right. And he says, I don't believe, as some writers have said, that these parts are immortal. Because, and the analogy I always use is, imagine you have a car.
Mm-hmm.
Your dad gives you a car, and it's an awesome car, right? But you have, let's say, the starter on that car is not working, and you have to go out and you have to manually bang on the starter to get it to spin past the dead spot so you can eventually start the car with the ignition. Now, you can do that, or you could replace the starter.
Yeah.
And then you wouldn't have to work. That doesn't change the overall nature or function. The car's function is still to get from A to B, right? The car still has the same basic components. It still looks nice. It still has the reverence that is due to this antique, right? And it's been serviceable and good. And then if the next month one of the tires blows out, you're not going to say, well, we can't get a new tire. This is the tire that came with it. Our fathers gave us this car, and this car had this tire. And if this tire is gone, that must be God's will.
Yeah.
And we just have to keep driving this car on 3 wheels, or else find, I don't know, maybe a piece of wood or something. Why not, as Trenchard said, replace the wheel?
Right.
And then that car continues to be functional, continues to provide the same service to you. It is of benefit to you. It does for you what every machine ever designed in human existence is supposed to do for you. It is supposed to be a benefit to you.
Right.
It is supposed to make it easier for you to do something.
And I think the important thing is that, or one of the important things is that the car doesn't precede the benefit or the person. In other words, the person wasn't made for the car was made for the person. And just the same way, government politics isn't made for we're not made for the government was made for and by us.
Right. There is no question that, God did not create a government other than the family.
Yeah.
All right. Now, when people began to multiply and to divide off into distinct societies, there is no mention at all in Holy Scripture of a government dictated to them by God.
Right.
Now, Trenchard and Gordon go over this in Cato's letters. Algernon Sidney goes over this in discourses that you can't find it. The only time you find God not endorsing necessarily, but denigrating a particular form of government is when Israel begs him to let them have a king like everybody else.
Uh-huh.
And the prophet Samuel tells them, no, you shall not have a king, because if you have a king, they will, rape and enslave your daughters and wives. They will take your sons and they will sacrifice them to war. And the God of Israel says to Samuel, you know what? They've rejected me, not you. Let them do. That's the only time.
And I love it because then he proves the point by giving them, who's the first king? Saul, and then David, and then Solomon. Thank you. And it proved the exact point of sending them to war, stealing their raping their women, stealing their money, and creating palaces larger than the temple. Yeah. I mean, all these things became exactly what was predicted.
Right. And so what letter 69 opens with is saying this government was created to serve the people. People created government to serve themselves. Now, it's created, government has its function, people, offices. Sometimes these things begin to decay. And you cannot say, well, this is the car that my grandpa gave me. If I change something in the car, if I improve something in the car, then I'm insulting my grandpa. No, because the car, your grandpa bought that car to serve his purpose. That car, like you so eloquently said, the car was made to serve the driver, not the driver, the car. Right. And so Trenchard says, don't get caught up in thinking that this machine that you've created to serve you is immortal. It isn't. It is subject to, what does he say? He says it's subject to wear out and to decay.
Right.
And sometimes he says there'll be some obstruction which clogs the motion. Okay, well, fix that obstruction. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? If the bathwater gets dirty, you don't say, well, I guess we have to throw this out because it's dirty and it's not doing its job of cleaning the baby. No, you take the baby out and you throw out the bathwater.
Right.
But in this analogy that we were using, you don't take the car and say, oh, well, the tire went flat. Time to just pull this into the junkyard and abandon it. No, change the bloody tire.
Yeah.
Find out what.
And at the same time, you don't put wings on it and say, okay, now.
Right. Also, you don't put 3 steering wheels in the car.
Right.
You don't put 12 wheels on the car. You don't do lots of things that, even though can a plane travel faster than a car? Yes. If you put wings on a car, is it going to fly? No.
Right.
But Mike, for generations now, politicians have been taking the car of the Constitution, refusing to change the starter, refusing to change the tires. And not only that, but putting wings on the car, putting 4 steering wheels in the car, doing all of these things that maybe in and of themselves are fine, but do not leave the car functional.
Yeah.
They make the car something that, first of all, now hardly resembles a car. And second of all, that car no longer serves the purpose of benefiting the driver. So instead of getting me from A to B, all it has become now is a money pit.
Yep.
Now it's just something that I have to keep because along comes somebody and says, you know what would help this car? What would help this car is if we had wings on it. Okay. Well, you know what would help this car if we had propellers in the front? You know what would help this car if we had 3 drivers?
And it's amazing how that same mechanic that is offering all those services to you and that you're paying for, now all of a sudden you become a slave, not just to the car, but to the mechanic that's putting all these things on there.
Right. The mechanic can tell you all he wants, but if doing what the mechanic suggests leaves you with a car that you can't drive to work, I don't care how good a mechanic he is. Don't tell me that this is a better car if this car that once got me from A to B now does nothing but suck my property, my money, and my time.
Yeah.
Forget it. It's like Sydney said, right? No one's going to listen to the shoemaker who tells you that this is the best shoe ever made if that shoe hurts you when you put it on.
See, and I could see like Trenchard and Gordon, having to be explicit about that, because we were talking about, they had a king. And so it's really important to say, hey, listen, the natural right of king, there's no such thing as a natural right of kings. Like that has to be kind of it has to be said and repeated over and over when you have a king that goes from father to son. In America, we have no excuse because we have supposedly this constitution that was supposed to limit government, supposed to limit it into what is known as government and not have it go outside into some other monster that is not government.
Right. But there are three things, and Trenchard and Gordon will go over them. And I've sort of distilled them into 3 V's. Regardless of having a constitution, that constitution is nothing but a dusty old parchment unless you have 3 things, and start with the letter V: virtue, vigilance, and valor. If you don't have those 3 things, words on a piece of paper are inert.
Right.
They cannot restrain a tyrant. Madison said there's nothing but a parchment barrier, right? What were you going to tell the tiger? Oh, I'm over here behind this piece of paper. You can't get me. Because that's essentially what we're doing, right? We're telling this tyrant, well, you can't take away my guns because the Second Amendment says you can't. Right. So we're going to go ahead and do that.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And now,
here's the registry. Here's the,
Yeah. And you have tyranny for dummies. And chapter 1 is get control of the education. So for over 100 years now, American kids from the age 5 to the age 18 are taught that the Second Amendment protects the right of the military to keep and bear arms, not individuals, right? They're taught also that the Supreme Court defines what the law really is. So you have the tyrants gained control of education. Chapter 2 in Tyranny for Dummies is disarm the people, because now they don't know their rights. They don't know the source of their rights. They're even taught that the tyrant actually is the source of their rights, or even that the Constitution is the source of their rights. And then being disarmed, the tyrant knows that there's nothing you can, once you do find out, once you, awake from this slumber, and you awake to an awful sense of what's going on around you, then it's like those Athenians that went and cried to Solon, hey, you were right about Pisistratus. He's weaselly. He's a tyrant now. He took our arms. And Solon responds with, you put your weapons into his hands. Now as his slaves, you must do as he commands. I'm a 93-year-old man. I'm done. I did my best, right? And so we don't have that excuse. But imagine if kids were taught this, and instead of saying, okay, we have 1 hour this week that we're going to talk about the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence.
Or this semester.
Or, right? If we have one, instead of, like I would do, let's take 3 hours and talk about Cato's letter number 69. Let's take a month and talk about Cato's letters, because I don't care who said it. If it fires you up and if it convinces you that liberty is something celestial that has a very high price placed upon it by heaven, and that every generation has an obligation to pay that price one way or the other, then you don't need to read all the rest. It would be wise, because out of the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, the truth of all things to be established.
Right.
So you don't want to just have Cato's letters. But Mike, I'm telling you, there could be a person read letter 69 and 70 and know more about liberty, its value, and your obligation to it as an inheritor of liberty than you would in 4 years of college, 3 years of law school, 12 years of public school.
Yeah.
You would know more just studying those 2 Cato's letters. And that is precisely why you will never read those two Cato's letters. You will never read them in school. I don't care how brilliant and how private and how patriotic your professor is. Those names are not going to be mentioned, my friend.
Yeah, well, they're lost. They're lost to history because if somebody were to read them, it will put a microscope right onto the ills of today. You can literally, once you read it, it's like the world opens up and you go, oh my gosh, I cannot believe. In other words, it allows you to repent. It allows you to say, I got to change my ways because I have allowed tyranny to enter into my life and to be a part of our society. And so it's up to me to stop it.
Yeah. And it's like they say, these people that read these, particularly if you read them before you are co-opted by the so-called education system, before you are programmed by the plutocrats, then you will read these and you will know that it is not only an obligation, it's not only a possibility, but it's an obligation to do what? To remove the obstructions, to, as they say, to supply the machine with new parts when the old ones become decayed or worn out. Which what? You can do that. Right. But imagine learning that.
The Declaration of Independence says it's our right and responsibility to do that.
It is your right. It is your duty to get rid of those guardians and find new ones. And this is what they're saying, that whether it's true or not, that these things in the Constitution are immortal, a political body, he says, has the advantage of a human body. We can look into its inmost frame and contexture. And when any of its constituent parts are decayed or worn out, we can supply it with new ones. And we can frequently annex, add to it, stick on it additional props and buttresses to support for some time a tottering building and hinder it from falling upon our heads. When you see that the Constitution is hanging by a thread, that gives you the opportunity to throw some rope around that thing and really strengthen it, right? But if you're not being virtuous, you don't care.
Right.
If you're not being vigilant, you won't notice. And if you're not being valiant, then when you care and you notice, you will do nothing about it. And I'm telling you, those who run things in this country and those whose object and design it is to destroy liberty here and in every country, they count. They don't care if you're virtuous. They don't care if you're vigilant, so long as you're not valiant. They rely on your cowardice. Because a lot of us see what's going on. A lot of us care about it going on. But how many of us do anything about it going on? And, this used to bother me a lot, Mike, because when I read these things, I was like, give me my shotgun. I'm marching to Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was convinced that that's not your role, right? I'm not James Madison. I'm Donald Robertson.
Right.
Right. So my job is to share these principles with people, and not to say that I won't have some role in fighting to restore liberty, but the point being that if I can put these principles, if I could get, imagine this, every teenager in America reads letters 60, 68, 69, and 70. Imagine the renaissance of republicanism with a small r that we could have in this country. Imagine just some of those kids that are coming up and with which the Creator has endowed with charisma, has endowed with eloquence, has endowed with an ability to write, so that these kids can not only see the obstructions, can not only detect the decay, but can do something about repairing it.
Well, and part of that repair, and he talks about this, he talks about that when a state, and I had to look up this word, is in a cachexy, is that how you pronounce it? Cachexy. That when it has become chronically ill, weakened, when you can't do anything about it, it's time to sell the car. It's time to send the car to the junkyard. It's time to separate ourselves instead of putting ourselves in danger every time we go on the road. It's time to say, you know what? We need to separate. We need to start our own virtuous thing and be valiant to that instead of continuing to give air, give power, or give any kind of credence to this thing that we used to call government.
Right. It's time to abandon the car, because it's not really even a car anymore, is it?
Right.
It's got wings on it. It's got, it's got 5 steering wheels. It has.
It's got the greatest batteries.
It's got weird sirens in it. It's got all these things. It's no longer a car.
Yeah.
Because what is the definition of a car? A car is this vehicle created by mankind to allow a person to get more efficiently, more quickly from A to B. Well, if because of this mechanic that you've relied on, and he's taken this car, and month after month, week after week, you're just dumping money, spending money, giving this to this mechanic who is now using your car as nothing more than an experiment, as a way you pay him $1,000 and he goes to the wing manufacturer and spends $500, and the wing manufacturer says, do whatever you can to keep on as this guy's mechanic. Finally, when the car is in that state and you are funding this mechanic and you are funding the fact that this car is no longer a car, it is time to cut ties with that mechanic and to go buy a new vehicle of your own choosing, whatever you think suits you best, right? From the Declaration of Independence, whatever you decide suits you best. And guess what? Maybe instead of hiring mechanics, maybe you learn about car repair yourself.
Might come to that.
Maybe there aren't many honest mechanics left. And so you look around and you go to a few, and every one of these guys you hire is like, it would be really good for this car? Some wings. And you're like, nope.
In fact, what you really need is you need some machine guns that I control, because there's other cars out there that are going to come and get you.
Yeah, other cars are there. I've seen cars with machine guns. I think you need a missile.
Right.
Right. I think you need a missile, and I think that all of these things, right? And maybe there comes a time when we cannot find mechanics who are honest, who are virtuous, who recognize that we invented the car for one purpose, and that we hire him for one purpose and one purpose only, to keep this car on the road and keep it functioning for my benefit. Mm-hmm. The minute it stops doing any of that, bye-bye, mechanic.
Right.
Because you're only a mechanic because I hired you to fix my car. You destroy. The minute you start destroying my car, you're no longer the mechanic. Now, if you and your buddies decide to overawe me and I come to cut off my relationship with you and you threaten me, or you sue me and take away my house and you take away my bank account, whatever you do, there comes a time which, as Trenchard says right here, he says, it is every honest man's duty to do. it's time to get rid of that mechanic.
Yeah.
So that he doesn't go ruining other cars.
That's right. And yeah, that's. And
so,
yeah,
go ahead.
No, I think, I think, and whether the mechanic has been around for centuries, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And I don't care who certifies,
right?
Whether it's, the Republican Party or the Democratic Party certifying that this is a really skilled mechanic. I don't care.
And yeah.
And I would say, are we at that state of Kashyyyk where it's time to abandon the car and abandon the mechanic like we were in 1776? That's,
here's what I would say. If you want to save the car and, if you want to save the Constitution, the best way to save the Constitution is to leave the Union, to separate.
And
so, yes, if you want to save the car, the best way to save the car is to get rid of the.
Maybe you buy a new car.
Yeah.
And you use as a model for your new purchase the car in its original state, the one that the mechanic ruined.
Yeah.
But it's like when people ask me, politicians, people say to politicians, what's the first thing you're going to do? And they start naming, in my first 100 days, I will do. You need to undo.
Right. What are you going to do?
Way before you start doing,
right.
You need to undo. Take the wings off the car. Take the wooden wheels. Take the machine guns off the car. Take the 5 steering wheels out of the car, right? Take all of these things out of the car that have proven to do nothing more than impoverish me and prevent me, obstruct me, in the words of Trenchard and Gordon, from moving as it was designed to do.
Right.
And I love what he says here, Mike, as you go along. He, because this is one thing you get from Trenchard and Gordon is their solutions. They don't just say, here's the problem. They say, well, there is a solution. And so I love how he says, our country abounds, or starts it out, there is wealth and power in being. Guess what, guys? You are alive. Our ancestors who've passed away can do nothing about the state of our union. Nothing. You can. There is wealth and power in being alive. You are alive. And while you are yet alive, it is your duty and your right to alter or abolish any government which has ceased to serve the function of government. And that phrase, there is wealth and power in being. Man, if you're listening to this and you're 16 years old, brother, let me Freaky Friday with you, and we will get this business done. It'll be like Sydney said. You have this generation of kids, or he said, young men who were hid and unregarded, nobody famous, right? It reminds me of that. Who is it? Plutarch, who writes about, is it Plutarch who writes about Alcibiades, the Greek, treacherous Greek, who writes, you don't have to come from a big city or a famous family to do great things, And so you may be out there thinking, I'm nobody, I'm no one, I'm not rich, I'm not powerful, but you're alive, man.
Right.
Your earning years are in front of you. Your learning years are in front of you. Because as Sydney says, when you come to that age that you are now old enough and strong enough to bear witness of your love of liberty, then that testimony that you bear will be greater than the ones born before you and will be talked about throughout all ages of time, so long as liberty exists.
And Sydney lived the part, didn't he?
Yeah. Sydney.
I mean,
yeah, he walked the walk for sure, right up to the scaffold and his head being chopped off in the name of, I'm not going to back down.
Right.
I will die resisting rather than live submitting. And so Trenchard writes, there is wealth and power in being. the parts of the government may be obstructed, may be worn out and decayed. You are young and powerful. You're alive. Don't look back and say, why did y'all not fix this? Just fix it, man.
Right.
There is wealth and
Now's
power.
the time. If it is to be, it's up to me.
Yeah. Our country, he writes, now he's talking about England, but we can say it of our own country. Our country abounds with men of courage and understanding. And I agree with him there. Our country abounds with men of courage and understanding. We're just not organized.
Mm-hmm.
The minute that we recognize that we all can come together and fight a common enemy, that will be the most 1776 thing we could do.
Yeah.
Because George III could have picked off those colonies. He made it to where they united, and that was the big problem.
Yeah.
England could have overawed Georgia, South Carolina, North. They could have overawed Massachusetts. But when he decided to treat Americans as one whole enemy, then we decided to act like one whole enemy.
And there is no reason why we shouldn't consider our those elite in Washington any different than the king.
They should be considered worse.
Yeah, enemy aliens that are.
Oh,
I mean, that's what they are.
They are absolutely enemies of mankind. And as you know, Sidney writes, against which every man is a soldier.
That's right.
Or not. Choose not to be a soldier. That's fine. But lead, follow, or get out of the way, as my dad used to say. Not everyone's a leader, but be a good follower. And if you're neither of those things, get out of the way so the rest of us can get some stuff done.
Yeah.
But he says, our country abounds with men of courage and understanding, nor are there wanting, so lacking, those of integrity and public spirit. We still have some men with integrity and who love their country. We still have those guys, right? There is, he says, an ardent, a burning desire and diffusive, spreading, growing love of liberty throughout the kingdom. Now, how are these people to be recognized? I think they're to be recognized by the next phrase here. And many of these people who have integrity, who love their country, who have courage and understanding, and who love liberty, they begin to be tired, sick, and ashamed of party animosity, of quarreling with their neighbors, their relations, and often with their best friends, to gratify the pride, ambition, and rapine of those who only sell and betray them. If you think Donald Trump gives a damn about you, you're a fool.
Right.
If you think Joe Biden gives a damn about you, you are a fool. And yet, here we are, and I was guilty of it in younger days, of letting my attachment to these tyrants alienate my loved ones.
Yeah.
All in service of these men who would slit your throat literally if that's all that stood between them and power. I'm telling you right now, if you were the only person standing between any person that we know of right now running for office as president and that Oval Office, if it was only you, they would cut you from ear to ear.
I think that's an important point, that there's no difference between the kingdoms of ore and today. In other words, we have stories from all over of kings killing people to get power, raising armies to do nothing but destroy, a brother or even a son, to maintain their power. And to think like that doesn't happen today or wouldn't happen today is completely insane. Of course, there's no difference.
They would cut their own mother's throat.
Of course they would.
They would do anything. I dare anyone who supports any of these politicians who would point to them and honestly and sincerely say, that is a man of integrity. Right? No way.
No way. No way.
You might say they're a good politician. You might say they're good for America, which isn't true. Because let's not forget, it was Donald Trump who enthroned Dr. Fauci.
That's right.
So don't get that twisted, y'all. It was Donald Trump who said, take the guns and then worry about due process later.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's not get it twisted. No one party has a monopoly on tyranny.
No,
so
they work together to support tyranny.
They actually do. So he says they are sick and tired because all of this, they want you to keep fighting.
That's right.
They want to keep the people divided. They want blacks and whites to have things to argue over. They want men and women to have things to argue over. They want atheists and Christians to have Christians and Muslims, rich and poor. They want landlords and tenants. They want bosses and employees. They want all of this to keep going because while we're involved in these disputes, we fail to lift our eyes and see on the walls of the castle all of those men laughing at us, knowing that we are going to destroy ourselves and that when we do, when we allow this animosity and this quarreling to weaken us all, then all they have to do is come in and just scrape up the remains and declare themselves, because they will put someone forward as our savior.
Yep.
It'll be the man on a horse, right? He will ride in and save us from ourselves. Now, but what does Trenchard say? It is yet in our power to save ourselves. And he says most men have an inclination to do it. And it is only owing to the art and address of our common enemies if we do not agree on the means of doing it. So I would say that anyone who causes division among the people, division that would prevent them from uniting in purpose, and that purpose being to dethrone the tyrants and those who support them, I would say that person should not be followed, should not receive a vote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because if that person's trying to convince us that someone else is the problem, not this, then that person is working, if not one of the tyrants, is working on their behalf.
Well, and like he says in this next paragraph, he says, who are the people that we need to find? He says, if there's such a general disposition towards liberty through the whole kingdom, that if there should be found in the next House of Commons, in other words, these are the people that we need to have in the next House of Commons. They are honest, bold, wise men who would have saved Sodom and Gomorrah. So there's like the trick, right? So are there 10 good politicians that would have saved Sodom and Gomorrah? Is there one?
Well, are there 10 honest citizens of the United States? Are there 10 honest, bold, and wise Americans who are willing to be a follower, if not a leader? Are you able to recognize the courageous and informed? Are you able to recognize those wiser than you and follow them? Are there 10 of them? And if not, then as he says, he's like, my heart can speak no more.
Right.
Then we're done for.
Yeah.
But
like Mormon said, I'll fight, but with no faith.
Yeah. I'll go down swinging, but obviously, but I'm going to go down.
Yeah.
Well, then he says, so gentlemen, it lies upon you to give motion to the machine. You are the first springs that give life to all virtuous resolutions. Such as you show yourselves, such will be your representatives. Such as is the tree, such will be the fruit. Choose honest men, free and independent men, and they will act honestly for the public interest, which is your interest. It is not to be expected that criminals will destroy their own handiwork, or that they will reform or punish themselves, or that men who have brought our misfortunes upon us will go about in good earnest to redress them, or even own that there are such.
So powerful.
You get the government that you deserve.
That's right.
So don't think that voting for someone who isn't a candidate for a major party is a waste of your vote. Because if voting for liberty is a waste of your vote, then voting doesn't matter. Then there needs to be something. If ballots don't work, then we have to go to bullets.
There has to be, we talk about balance of power, but the ultimate balance of power is the people itself, is the people saying no, whether that's in a jury on a small scale, but even on a larger scale. No. This has got to end. I refuse to accept your authority because you have stepped outside it.
Right. And it's, we are the ones, you're the ones who are going to decide whether that car gets scrapped and a new one is bought that functions the way cars are supposed to function. Yeah. You're the one who's going to decide if that mechanic, if you keep paying him, despite the fact that he's turned your car into something unrecognizable and not only does not serve your purpose, but impoverishes you, you are going to decide that.
And don't think like just by you pointing it out, he's going to change. Hey, why did you do that? He's not. The criminal will not change will not fix it himself.
Yeah, I mean, you never hear someone running for president saying, "Do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to be bound." Well, except for Ron Paul,
right.
You never hear someone say, "I'm going to be bound by the Constitution," and rather than promise you things I'm going to do, I'm going to promise you things I'm going to undo. You just don't hear it, except from him, right? You hear how they're going to. I'm going to get in there and I'm going to be better than the last guy. And I'm going to do all these great things in my first 100 days, et cetera, et cetera. And they do nothing. Guys, Obamacare is still the law. Yeah. Trump didn't undo Obamacare.
No. Biden
didn't do any of Trump's stuff. Right? You'll see in the news, go Google it. You'll see Biden says the Biden administration has decided to carry on with the Trump policy on X.
We're still at war, maybe in a different place in some places, but we're still at war.
Right? Biden was going to end the wars. No, he hasn't. There's still troops in Afghanistan.
Right.
And yesterday, you had Lindsey Graham, who, never met a war he didn't like. You have Lindsey Graham calling for us to reinvade Afghanistan.
Goulds. These people are.
And I'm telling you right now, spoiler alert, but Trenchard and Gordon have one of the Cato's letters called On Heroes, and tells exactly what we should do with these politicians who vote to keep us at war. I won't tell you what it is, but you go get yourself a copy of Cato's letters, look for the one about heroes, read that and see what they suggest we should do with these politicians.
Don't wait for the podcast to come out.
Yeah.
We will cover it, but read it first.
So we won't have, these politicians are never going to come and undo the bad things their predecessors have done because they're all part of the same criminal organization.
And don't think like you can not only vote, but don't think you can like file suit against them because all the judges have been bribed by the government. The judges are being paid, are on the payroll of the government. So they're going to rule in favor of the government. I mean, that's just like, who's the paymaster? So if you bring up a lawsuit against some municipality or some government official or something, they're not going to look at the liberty angle of it. They're going to look at, oh, there's precedence for this, there's precedence for that. And since some other tyrannical judge ruled this way, I'm going to rule the same way, which is always going to be against the people. They're on the payroll of the mob.
And it's the mob that runs the show. And he says that deep wounds must be probed and searched to the core before they can be cured.
Love that.
Now, when I hear this, I think of these committee meetings of Congress where they had Fauci and they had all these people, the FBI director and all of these people, the IRS director, and they come in and it's just kabuki theater.
Yep.
It's sound and fury signifying nothing. They have them come in, Rand Paul goes up one side and down the other, and nothing happens.
And all it proves is that they know that it's unconstitutional, that they're willfully going against the freedom of the people.
But what has happened? Is Hunter Biden in jail?
No.
Is Fauci in jail?
Nope.
Is Hillary Clinton in jail?
Nope.
Is the IRS director in jail?
Nope.
Is the FBI director in jail? No.
Nope.
And never will be. Never will be.
Never will be.
Never until we realize that we give motion to the machine.
Right.
Until we fire that mechanic, scrap that car, they will never, those people I just named will never, not only will they not be in jail, but guess what? You know that famous picture of Donald Trump at that party with the Clintons?
Yes.
You are going to have a picture of your favorite politician at parties with Fauci, with Hillary Clinton,
That's right.
with the IRS director, because they don't give a damn about you. They would slit your throat, and I mean that quite literally. They would slit your throat if you stood between them and power, them and money.
That's right.
Because nothing has happened to them and nothing will happen to them.
Right.
What do you think would happen if in Bizarro world, there was a committee, a congressional committee that found out that 9/11 was an inside job? What do you think George W. Bush would be hanged as a traitor?
No way.
No way. As a matter of fact, he'd have people going on all the shows, and he himself, I don't know. That's my Clinton. I can't do George W. I don't know how to do George W. Bush. Wouldn't be. No, that's George H.W. Bush. I don't know how to do W, but he would get paid to be a associate professor at Princeton.
Yes, he would. Yes, he would.
Fauci's getting paid $250,000 to go around and give speeches. And that's what would happen. Why? Because criminals, there's honor among thieves.
Yeah.
They're not going to undo their own stuff, man.
That's right.
And they're not even going to admit what. Do you think when Bill Clinton was proved to have had relations, intimate relations with Monica Lewinsky, after, you can go and watch on YouTube where he's pounding the pulpit, right? I am going to say it one last. He was so angry. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky.
Right. He's
shaking the finger. He's wagging his finger at all you prudes and all you Republicans. And then what? A month later, we get, I will admit that we had inappropriate relation. What? Meaning what? Exactly what I was accused of. I'm doing. Did it matter? No, he was reelected.
He was reelected. And
overwhelmingly reelected.
Right.
And it was funny at the time because people were like, well, that ruined him. I'm like, are you serious?
Well, because here's the thing is that's like to me, that's like the crumb that they put out there. In other words, there's so much stuff you had on the Clintons and any politician that you could get, but that was just here's a little red meat for you guys. We're going to talk about this little sexual, indecency, but we're not going to talk about the real crimes that this family has done.
Yeah.
We're not going to talk about the actual lives that they have killed, that they have taken away. We're not going to talk about the actual, drug smuggling that they have done. We're not going to talk about anything that And this is not just the Clintons. I'm talking about every single politician.
Yeah, read the history of the Bush family.
Yeah. It's insane. It's
the
insane.
Walker family. Read the history of that family. You know, George Herbert Walker Bush. Yeah, read the Walker family and the Bush. All of them are the same, these elites.
They're the same.
Right?
You go look at the history. How did LBJ become president? Huh.
How did Kennedy become president?
Right.
Joe Kennedy made deals with the mafia.
Yeah.
Why was Kennedy assassinated? Because Bobby Kennedy starts busting up the mafia. The point is, these guys are always going to do this, and it is up to you to undo it. I love what he says. He's like, look, you got to probe and search to the core. We have got to hold these people. We have got to hold Nuremberg trials.
Yeah.
And the minute someone says, well, I was just doing what I was told to do, hang him.
Yeah.
There should be a gallows with 100 nooses. One lever, hang him.
There's absolutely no fear of the sword of Damocles. Zero.
And here's what they say. They say these people that did the damage, they're not going to let the operation go on. No. And they're certainly not going to actually admit that there's a cure, because they can be put at ease by the death of the patient. Guys, if this doesn't ring for the COVID generation, they profit from murdering you. And if you don't think it's murder, what is that? The premeditated killing of another in cold blood? Every death, the result of one of those vaccines, Fauci and any politician who promoted them should be held. And, Trenchard and Gordon says this, that you're not only guilty, not only is the guy, holding the gun guilty of the crime, but any of those people that made that crime possible.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those people should be lined up and held accountable.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
Because ultimately, it's going to be better for me than for thee. Because they profit from the murder. You've got to understand that. And these committee meetings never do anything. And it's time to realize that.
Yeah.
That it's theater. It's kaboom. It's like, here's the script, read off the script, do the thing, and scene. And nothing changes.
Nothing.
And it's time to do that. And then, of course, let us not, therefore, my countrymen, desert or deceive ourselves, or think we can be safe if such men get into power. Let's not again be deluded with false promises, deceitful assurances, but, and here's the thing, let us judge what men will do by what they have done. Judge men what they will do by what they have done. And then listen to the list of things that he says, if any of this has happened with any of these people involved in it, you can know that they should never be given power. So he says what? Exorbitant pensions, outrageous taxes, wild and expensive expeditions, increasing the public debt, standing troops quartered up and down the country, oppressive companies, the destruction of your trade and industry, private men raising immense estates upon your ruin, bribing and corrupting the guardians of the public liberty. If that's happened when that man was in any way connected with making those policies, that man does not deserve power. That man is a criminal and should be treated accordingly.
Check, double check. Yep.
And then,
and again, this speaks right to today. It really does.
And he asks, he's like, what do you think? What about all these complaints? Guys, look at those things. It's like I tell people to go to the Declaration of Independence and read the complaints, the grievances against the king.
You're like, oh, is that all?
I'm like, is that it? I mean, Caligula blushes when he sees what our politicians do today. When it someday comes out, which I'm prayerful and faithful that it will, just how demonic some of these despots are, I think some people will be shocked to learn of the extent of the evil that these men that you support and that you praise and that you fight with your family over, that you alienate your friends and loved ones over, that you cause fights with your neighbors over, when you find out just how vile and vicious and disgusting and demonic that man was, how foolish are you going to feel? And you don't have to worry about, is it true? That's why we're reading this letter to you now.
Right.
You know it's true. And he says, what about every one of these complaints? As Mike just said, check, check, check. Look at these things, guys. Outrageous taxes, wild and expensive expeditions. Bloody Joe Biden goes to, where was it? Poland, and has like a 24-car, what do they call it? Motorcade?
Yeah.
24 cars. Obama goes to Spain.
King Assad would have been over that.
Obama goes to Spain and he rents out a castle for his family for holiday, not for some official thing.
Right.
And when I say he rents it out, we rented it out for them.
Yep.
Exorbitant taxes. I mean, come on. Increasing the public debt. Standing troops quartered up and down your country. Trust me, the local police are now the standing army.
Yep.
Destruction of trade and industry. Dude, why is nothing made in America anymore? Because these oppressive companies have bribed and corrupted the guardians of liberty, and they now work together to build immense estates upon your ruin.
That's right.
Fauci got that golden parachute, man.
He did. And
he is a multi-millionaire.
He was the highest paid public official in America.
Yeah, more than the president.
Yeah.
And he made millions in the sale of stock.
Yep.
And upon the ruin.
He made commissions on those vaccines.
Do you know anyone who lost their job because of COVID? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know anyone who lost their wives? Do you know anyone who committed suicide? All of that should be laid at the feet of Fauci and any of the politicians who supported him.
And they will laugh unless you do something about it.
Yeah, they're laughing now.
Yeah.
They'll hear this podcast
you
and
can
laugh.
place all this in front of them and they'll be like, ha, 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 what you going to do?
But the worst thing isn't them, Mike.
Right.
Tyrant's going to tyrant. Liar's going to lie. Right? The worst thing is the millions of Americans who are stupid and servile enough to stand between you and holding those people accountable.
Yeah.
So what happens if you awake to a sense of your awful situation? Well, then Cato has the response. Now, therefore, my best friends, is the time to help yourselves. Now act honestly and boldly for liberty, or forget the glorious and charming sound.
You are listening to And If Love Remains.
The first of 23 installments requested by Dr. Levitt. Trying to be in compliance here because we're taking him and that whole organization down.